I'm Renata, and I need to tell you something that happened to me 18 years ago. Something I've never fully said out loud until now. When I was 15, my mother locked me out of the house, not as a punishment for anything specific, not because I'd done something catastrophic. She did it because my stepfather told her to, and because she chose him. She always chose him. She changed the deadbolt on a Tuesday afternoon in October while I was at school, and when I came home, my backpack hitting my hip with every step, there was a sticky note on the door. It said, "You're old enough to figure things out. This isn't working for us anymore." That was it. No phone call. No warning. I was 15 years old, standing on a porch in Columbus, Ohio, in weather that couldn't decide if it was fall or winter, with $32 in my wallet and nowhere to go. I never went back. 18 years later, I am sitting in my office at Clearwater Medical Group, the practice I built from nothing, the one my name is on the door of, when my phone lights up with a number I don't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then another. 6 calls in 20 minutes, all from the same number. When I finally listen to the message, I hear my mother's voice for the first time since I was 22, and she is crying in the way people cry when they need something, not when they're actually sorry. She says my stepfather is sick. She says they have nothing. She says she doesn't know who else to call. She has 47 missed calls logged to my number by the end of that week. I counted. I want to tell you that I was unmoved. I want to tell you I deleted every voicemail and went back to my patients and never thought about it again. But the truth is messier than that. The truth is I sat in my car in the parking garage for 45 minutes the night of that first call, just staring at the concrete pillar in front of me, feeling 15 again in the way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in almost 2 decades. This is that story. The whole thing. My mother's name is something I still can't say without a particular tightening in my chest, so I'll just call her my mother, because that's all she ever was to me. A title, not a role. My stepfather came into our lives when I was 9. Before him, it had been just the two of us in a small apartment on the east side, and even though money was always tight and my mother worked nights and sometimes I ate cereal for dinner 3 days in a row, I was not unhappy. I knew she loved me then. I'm almost certain of it. His name is Roland. He is the kind of man who fills a room with his certainty, who has opinions about everything and softens none of them, who looks at a child and sees either an asset or an inconvenience. I became an inconvenience almost immediately. He had a daughter from his first marriage, 2 years older than me, Becca, who visited on weekends and was treated like a visiting dignitary. I was the roommate nobody had asked for. For 6 years, I learned to make myself small. I ate quickly and disappeared to my room. I kept my grades up because it was the one thing nobody could argue with. I worked a summer job at 14 so I could buy my own school supplies and not have to ask for anything. I was careful and quiet and I stayed out of the way, and it still wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The October I was 15, something shifted. I still don't fully know what. Roland and I had an argument about something small. I had left a glass on the coffee table, or I had come home 20 minutes after my curfew, I don't even remember, and he looked at my mother and said, "This isn't going to work." And she nodded. She actually nodded. She actually nodded. I found out later from a neighbor that they had been planning it for weeks. The sticky note. That changed locks. $32 and the backpack I'd carried to school that morning, still with my biology textbook and a half-eaten granola bar in the front pocket. I walked to the library because it was warm and it was open until 9. I sat at a table near the back and I did not cry, which surprises me even now when I think about it. I felt something colder than crying, something that settled in my stomach like stone. I took out my notebook and I wrote down every option I could think of, the way you do when you're 15 and the world has just gone completely sideways and you have to think or you'll fall apart. My father wasn't in the picture. I had one aunt on my mother's side, her younger sister Deb, who lived 40 minutes away in Westerville and who had always been quietly kind to me in the way people are when they disagree with someone, but don't want the confrontation. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. I called her from the library payphone. I used the quarters from the bottom of my backpack. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. My voice was steady. I think that scared her more than crying would have. Stay there, she said. Don't move. I'm coming. She drove 40 minutes in the dark in October, and she did not make me feel like a burden when she walked through the library doors. She made me feel like someone who had been waited for. I lived with Aunt Deb for the next 3 years. I finished high school on the honor roll. I got a full scholarship to Ohio State, then medical school at Northwestern, then a residency in Chicago that nearly killed me with its hours and its demands and its relentlessness. Every single brick of that was laid without my mother's help, without Roland's help, without anyone who had stood on that porch with me in October. When I opened Clearwater Medical Group at 31, the day I put my name on that door, I thought about the sticky note. I thought about it for one moment and then I went inside and got to work. That was 4 years ago. The 47 calls came on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had listened to 11 voicemails and deleted the rest unheard. My mother's voice changed across those 11 messages. It started controlled and syrupy, escalated into tearful, then became something harder around message 8. You have a responsibility to this family. That one I had to replay twice because I genuinely could not believe she'd said it. My office manager, Priscilla, noticed something was off that week. She's worked with me for 3 years and she has the particular skill of knowing when to ask and when not to. That Thursday, she put a coffee on my desk and said, "You look like someone who needs to talk or needs to be left alone." "Which one?" I told her. "Not everything, but enough." She listened without interrupting, which is its own kind of gift. When I finished, she said, "What are you going to do?" I said I didn't know yet. That night, I called Aunt Deb. She already knew. My mother had called her too, apparently, which told me more about the desperation of the situation than any of the voicemails had. My mother and Aunt Deb had not spoken warmly in years. Not since Deb had made clear, quietly but firmly, that what happened to me when I was 15 was not something she could pretend was normal. My mother had not forgiven her for that. "She called you?" I asked. "3 times, Deb said. She wanted me to convince you to help them. She said Roland needs surgery and they can't cover it." A pause. "She also said you owe them." There it was. That phrase. I had heard it in my head for 18 years in different forms. You owe us for the years we fed you. You owe us for the childhood you had. You owe us for things that were never gifts to begin with. Now here it was, said out loud, to a third party, as if it were simply a fact of accounting. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her that was between you and her," Deb said. "And then I told her she should be ashamed of herself." Another pause, quieter. "Are you okay?" I was not okay, but I knew how to function while not being okay. That's a skill you develop early when you have to. I decided to meet her, not because I owed her anything, not because I felt guilty, or not only because I felt guilty. I decided to meet her because I needed to look at this thing directly and close it, the way you have to close a wound properly or it just keeps opening. I texted her, Sunday, 10 a.m., the coffee shop on Mercer, come alone. She replied in under a minute. "Thank you, sweetheart. I knew you'd understand." I did not respond to that. She was already there when I arrived, which surprised me. She'd gotten there early, which meant she was nervous, which meant she understood the stakes, even if she'd never admit it. She looked older. Of course she did. 18 years is 18 years. But she also looked like herself in all the ways that mattered. The careful makeup, the way she sat with her back straight like she was performing composure, the smile that arrived on her face when she saw me that was warm in a way that bypassed her eyes entirely. "Renata." She stood up. "Look at you." I sat down without hugging her. Her smile didn't falter. She was better at this than I remembered. We ordered coffee. She talked about the drive, the weather, how the city had changed. I let her. I know this performance. It's the one where everything is normal and comfortable until suddenly it isn't, and by then you're already 3 layers deep in the conversation and it's harder to hold your ground. I sat with my hands around my mug and I waited. Finally, she exhaled and looked down at the table. "You know why I wanted to see you." "You've told me in 11 voicemails," I said. "Tell me again in person." She looked up. Something flickered across her face. Not quite hurt, not quite anger. Something calculating. "Roland is very sick, Renata. The surgery is $60,000 and insurance is only covering part of it." We've tried everything. We've used everything." Her voice dropped. "I don't have anyone else. That's not my fault," I said. "I'm not saying it's your fault." She reached across the table and I moved my hands to my lap. Her hand stopped on the table between us. "I'm asking for help." "As your mother, you stopped being my mother on a Tuesday in October when I was 15, I said. "You made that choice. You both did." Her face changed then. The performance slipped, just for a second. "You were a difficult child. I was 15, I said, and you locked me out of the house. Roland, you chose Roland, I said. Over and over again, you chose Roland. I'm not interested in relitigating it. I'm telling you why I don't owe you what you're asking for." I picked up my coffee. "I'm not going to help pay for his surgery. I'm not going to help with anything. I'm sorry he's sick. I genuinely am. But my compassion has limits, and this is where they are." She stared at me. The tears started, real ones this time. Or at least they looked real. "You've become so cold." "I became self-sufficient," I said. "There's a difference." I left $30 on the table for the coffees and I walked out. My hands didn't shake until I got to my car. I thought it was over. I was wrong. The first thing I noticed on Monday morning was an email from a colleague, a doctor I'd worked with during my residency, someone I respected and hadn't spoken to in months. The subject line was, "Heard something troubling, wanted to reach out." I opened it before I'd even taken off my coat. She'd received messages, anonymous, through the hospital's general contact form, claiming that I had a history of financial misconduct within my family, that I had stolen money from an elderly relative, that I had abandoned aging parents to avoid financial responsibility. The messages included my name, my practice's name, and the medical board's contact information with the suggestion that this might be worth looking into. I read the email twice. Then I opened my practice's public review pages. There were 9 new reviews, all posted within the last 48 hours, all from accounts with no history, all saying variations of the same thing, that I was cold, mercenary, that I had abandoned my family for money, that patients should think twice before trusting someone like me with their care. I called my lawyer before I called anyone else. Her name is Theodora, and she has been on retainer for the practice since we opened, and I have never been more grateful for that decision than I was standing in my coat in my own office, telling her what I was looking at. "Send me everything," she said. "Don't post anything, don't respond to anything, don't delete anything, just send it all to me." Then I called Aunt Deb. "They've started going after my practice," I said. A long silence. Then, "She promised me she wouldn't do this." "When did you talk to her?" "Sunday night," Deb said quietly. "After you met her. She called me crying. I told her to let it go, Renata. I told her if she pushed any further, she was going to lose any chance of ever having a relationship with you. She made her choice," I said. I hung up and sat with my hands flat on my desk for a moment. The anger was there, but I knew better than to let it make decisions. I had built this practice over 4 years of 16-hour days and patient trust and a reputation I had earned without any help from anyone in that family. They were not going to touch it. I called a meeting with Priscilla and my 2 senior colleagues that afternoon. I told them what was happening. All of it, the background, the meeting on Sunday, the fake reviews, the anonymous reports. I watched their faces as I talked. None of them looked surprised that I had this history. They looked angry on my behalf, which is its own particular kind of solidarity. "What do you want to do?" Priscilla asked. "I want to respond," I said. "I want to respond," I said. "On our terms, not theirs." Theodora had advised against going public. My PR instinct, the one I'd developed from years of managing a medical practice in the age of online reviews and social media crises, told me the opposite. If I stayed quiet, the narrative belonged to whoever was writing it. If I spoke, I could change that. I drafted a statement that night. It took me 4 hours. I rewrote it 11 times. I wanted it to be factual and human and not defensive in a way that reads as guilt. I talked about my background in general terms, that I had been estranged from my family since adolescence, that I had built my career and my practice independently, that false allegations had been made to professional contacts and on public review platforms, and that I intended to pursue legal remedies for defamation while also simply telling the truth. The truth, I wrote, is that I was asked to provide significant financial support to family members who chose to remove me from their home when I was 15 years old. I declined. What followed is a matter for my lawyer. What I want my patients and colleagues to know is this: I have given 18 years to building something I am proud of, and I will not allow anyone to misrepresent who I am. I posted it at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, it had been shared 400 times. The response was not what I expected. Or maybe it was exactly what I should have expected and just hadn't let myself hope for. People were furious. But at my mother and Roland, not at me. Comments came in from strangers who had been through their own versions of this, parents who had disappeared and reappeared the moment there was something to gain, families who treated estrangement as a financial transaction to be reversed when circumstances changed. A woman in her 50s wrote that she had left home at 17 under similar circumstances and had lived with the guilt of her professional success ever since, feeling like she owed people who had never actually invested in her. The fake reviews were flagged and removed within 48 hours by the platforms. The anonymous reports to my colleague were traced through some digital forensics. Theodora had arranged to an IP address registered to Roland's home. Theodora sent a cease and desist letter to my mother and Roland within the week. It was very clear about what further actions would constitute and what the consequences would be. They did not respond to the letter directly, but the calls stopped. The fake reviews stopped. The anonymous reports stopped. Becca, Roland's daughter, my one-time stepsister, whom I had not thought about in years, sent me a message through my practice's website. She said she was sorry. She said she had known about the plan to lock me out of the house when I was 15, that she had been old enough to understand what was happening and had said nothing, and that she had carried that for a long time. She said she didn't expect anything from me but wanted me to know. I read that message 3 times. I didn't respond. I'm still not sure if that's right or wrong. Maybe both. 2 months after the cease and desist letter, Aunt Deb called to tell me my mother and Roland had sold the house. She didn't know where they'd gone. She said my mother had called her one last time. Not to apologize, but to say that I had made everything worse and that she hoped I was satisfied. I drove past the house the following weekend. Not intentionally. I was visiting Deb and took a wrong turn on a road I used to know well. The for sale sign was already down. New owners, probably. The porch looked the same. The front door had been repainted. I sat at the corner for a minute, engine idling. I had expected to feel something dramatic. Triumph, maybe, or grief, or the particular ache of things that can never be fixed. What I felt instead was something quieter. Something like the absence of weight. Like I had been carrying a stone in my coat pocket for 18 years and had finally, somewhere along the way, set it down on the ground without noticing. I drove to Deb's house. She made pasta. We watched an old movie she loved and I'd never seen. We talked about small things. Her garden, a trip she was thinking about, a book she'd finished. I told her about a patient who had made me laugh that week. We did not talk about my mother. When I left, she hugged me at the door for a long time. "You're okay," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am. There's a thing people say about forgiveness, that it's not for the other person, it's for you. I've heard it 100 times, and I've always found it a little too clean, a little too packaged, like a concept that was designed to make the person who's been hurt do all the emotional labor while the person who did the hurting gets to move on without any reckoning. What I've actually come to understand is something different. It's not about forgiving or not forgiving. It's about deciding where they live, in you. My mother and Roland lived in me for a long time in the way that painful things do, taking up space in the background of everything, coloring decisions I didn't even know they were touching, making me prove things to people who weren't there to see it. That's the real cost of what they did, not the locked door, not the sticky note, not even the fake reviews or the anonymous reports. The cost was all those years of carrying them with me even after I'd walked away. I can't tell you I'm completely free of that. I don't think it works like a door you close. But I can tell you that when I go to work now, I walk in and I see my name on that door and I don't feel the need to justify it to anyone. I built this. I did this. The people who tried to unmake me don't live in that building. The contacts in my phone are different now, too. My mother's number is blocked. Roland's is blocked. The unknown numbers that ring through, I let them go to voicemail. And I don't feel the old clench of dread that I used to feel. The one that said, what if it's them? What if something happened? What if you're supposed to care about this? Aunt Deb is the first person I call when something good happens. She was the first call I made when I signed the lease on my office. She was the first call I made when my practice hit a milestone I'd been working toward for 2 years. She was there when I thought I was falling apart, and she didn't make me feel like a burden for needing her. That is what family actually is. Not blood and not obligation. Not the sticky note on the door. And not the 47 calls when there's money to be gotten. It's the person who drives 40 minutes in the dark in October because a 15-year-old called from a payphone and needed help, and who never once made you feel like that night was something you owed her for. I don't owe anyone my suffering just because they share my last name. If you've ever stood somewhere similar outside a door that should have been open to you, carrying something heavy that wasn't yours to carry, I want you to know that the weight doesn't have to stay with you forever. Choosing yourself is not cruelty. Protecting what you've built is not selfishness. Walking away from people who see you as a resource and not a person is not something you need permission for. You are allowed to be free. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a choice like this? A moment where you decided that your own peace was worth protecting, even when it cost you something. Drop a 1 in the comments if any part of this story felt familiar, or tell me where you're watching from. And if something about this didn't sit right with you, tell me that too. I want to hear it. If this story reached you in any way, consider subscribing. There are more of these, more true things about what it means to survive the people who were supposed to love you and to build something real on the other side. Until next time, choose yourself. Always. I've thought a lot about what Roland and my mother actually set in motion that Tuesday in October, not what they intended. I don't think they thought about it much at all, honestly. I think they made a decision that was convenient for them and told themselves a story about it being necessary, maybe even good for me. That's what people do when they don't want to examine the cost of their choices. They dress it up in language about strength and independence and lessons learned, and they move on without ever sitting with what they actually did. But here's what I've come to understand about cause and effect. It doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about what you do. When you remove someone from your life because they're inconvenient, you don't get to reappear when circumstances change and call it family. When you build a pattern of choosing your own comfort over someone else's safety, you don't get to invoke obligation the moment you need something. The consequences of what they did didn't arrive the night I stood on that porch. They arrived 18 years later in a coffee shop on Mercer Street when I looked at my mother's face and felt nothing that resembled debt. That's how cause and effect actually works. It's slow, it's patient, and it's thorough. What I keep coming back to is the question of what it actually takes to build a life from nothing. Not the dramatic version of it, not the version that gets cleaned up into a neat story about triumph. The real version, which is mostly just choosing to do the next hard thing when you're exhausted and scared and you don't know if it's gonna work. I worked 3 jobs my first year of college. I slept on Deb's couch through the summers and studied in library basements and said no to things I wanted because I had a plan, and the plan required everything I had. Nobody gave me that discipline. My mother didn't give me that. Roland certainly didn't. That was mine. It came from deciding at 15 years old that I was going to be the kind of person who figures things out. Not because they told me to, but because the alternative was letting them define what I was capable of. There's something I want to say to anyone who grew up in a house where love felt conditional, where you were managed more than you were cherished, where you learned early to make yourself small and quiet and easy. The resilience you built in that environment is real. It is yours. But it was built under conditions that were wrong, and the fact that you survived them doesn't mean you were supposed to. You deserved better, and you are allowed to decide at any point that you won't keep paying a price for someone else's failure. Deb drove 40 minutes in the dark for me once. That's not a small thing. I've tried to be that for other people in my life. The one who shows up, the one who doesn't make you feel like a burden for needing something. I think that's what the experience actually taught me. Not the version my mother would tell, but the real one. It taught me the difference between people who love you and people who need you, and it taught me that the two are not the same thing. I am not who I am in spite of what happened. I am who I am because of every choice I made after it. That belongs to me, and I'm not giving any of it back.